Hi all, Rick here. In this video, I'm going to attempt to explain the warp of Warhammer to those who know Star Trek and explain warp drive of Trek to those who understand Warhammer. A while ago I did an overview of my interpretation of Warhammer 40k's setting and people asked for more comparisons, so here we go. The warp in Warhammer is another realm, a different layer of reality. In Star Trek terms, it would be a layer of subspace. But with Warhammer 40k originating as a sci-fi counterpart of a fantasy genre game, there is a sort of fantastical element to the universe, which is wrapped in the drapery of science fiction. The Immaterium, the warp, the realm of chaos or the sea of souls, is a manifestation of a sentient being's subconsciousness and emotional state of the galaxy. The very essence of it is made from, well, the souls of those that passed and shaped by the goings-on of the real space beyond it. With the galaxy in a state of perpetual warfare, it's long been a pretty negative place, filled with malevolent demons and turbulent currents. It is also the preferred way for many species to travel faster than light, including the Imperium of Man. So, the warp drive itself was devised sometime in the lost dark age of technology, around the 18th millennium. Before its invention, generational colony ships were the best way to settle new worlds, and gradually the fledgling interstellar empire was built. After warp drive, however, things rapidly accelerated into a golden age. It was found that a vessel would have to put enough distance between a star system and itself to safely initiate a warp jump, and this was designated the Mandeville Point. Most of the time this distance was still days if not weeks of sublight travel, but once here the warp process could begin. For the most part, the auto-navigational systems of the drive could scan into the warp to detect the current ebbs and flows of the Immaterium. The realm of the warp is not stagnant, it is full of currents of warp energy that can drag a ship off course, so these have to be charted. Once a map is formed, the course is plotted, typically covering 5 light-years of real space. Any further risks exponential discrepancies in their course as the currents, like the weather, are less predictable the further out you go. So, a short route is planned and the drive engaged. From here, a Geller field is projected. This is an energy field of some form of subatomic particle that is anathema to warp energy. So when the ship is flooded in a shield of this, it wards off the negative effects of warp travel. Such effects include potential possession by demons, insanity from the flood of emotions and souls within the realm, the unintentional influence of the crew's emotions on the course, and the simple non-existence of the laws of physics. So the Geller field stays up, at all costs. With this projected bubble of normal space-time around the vessel, it is able to follow its charted course and emerge back into real space after a short sojourn through this roiling hell. Regular locomotive abilities apply within the field, so a ship's regular engines will carry it just fine. Likely some deviation has occurred, as both time and distance are impossible to measure in comparison to the outside world once immersed in the warp. In later years, these sorts of trips will be referred to as blind jumps. Because after 4,000 years of this, a new type of human emerged among the Psychers. Psychers are people who are attuned to the warp, who can mentally tap into its energies to do feats ranging from telepathy to summoning lightning bolts. In the setting of 40k, it's quite tied up in mysticism, but likely during the golden age of technology and even the Great Crusade, it was approached with a far more scientific lens. So these new Psychers were capable of maintaining their mental faculties within the warp. Basically, they could peer into the abyss without it driving them mad, and could also navigate its currents thanks to this clarity. These Psyker navigators became a staple on starships, with them able to guide vessels among the flowing turmoil of currents, accounting for drift, course corrections and other effects as they went, vastly improving the accuracy and time with which a vessel could spend traversing the warp. This led to jumps covering thousands of light years instead, and the golden age of humanity was in full swing. But then, because this is Warhammer, that all went wrong for a few thousand years thanks to events beyond humans' control. For 5,000 years the warp became too tumultuous to travel, and the worlds of mankind were separated. Much of the tech was lost and is still being recovered by the age of Warhammer 40k. So by the time of the year 40,000, things have gone a little wonky. Warp travel is back on the menu, but several things have happened. One is that the technology to run a Geller field has been replaced by a comatose psyker. A human psychic in a medically induced coma is made to dream of the real world, the real space, and this generates the predictive field for warp travel. The other is the existence of the Astronomicon, a guiding beacon that acts as a navigational point around which all the Imperial ships can use as a reference to continue to travel at warp without becoming lost in the Sea of Souls. A beacon that mankind pays a hefty price to maintain, but that's a separate topic. Now, there are several caveats to the instability of warp travel. Warp channels are charted routes that, for whatever unknown reason, remain mostly calm and free of navigational hazards. And then there are warp gates, which are seemingly paired gateways that project a stable corridor between two fixed points with no deviation. But for the most part, navigating through the warp is a dangerous, if routine, affair. Because of the inherent deviation involved, it's not uncommon for fleets on long journeys to periodically set rally points to wait at, so to ensure all are accounted for and reform before moving on with the next leg of their journey. So, moving across now to explaining warp drives in Star Trek. Warp drive has been invented and reinvented across numerous alien cultures in history within Trek. And while there were some early attempts at colonizations with generational ships, it was not until warp drive was invented and successfully tested by a scientist named Zephram Cochrane that mankind's true interstellar age began. Warp drive here is essentially the compression of space-time ahead of the vessel before restoring it behind, allowing the ship to literally travel across more bent or compressed space than it would otherwise be able to do. From the outside observer, this makes the ship look like it's going way faster than the laws of physics should allow. So, unlike Warhammer, warp drive in Star Trek is not a separate realm. It physically sees a vessel accelerated through space-time via a kind of cheat. So, in Star Trek, there exists a subspace. This is the medium used to explain a lot of faster-than-light travel, and other strange effects in the shows that otherwise would be impossible thanks to the laws of the universe as we understand them in real life. Subspace basically has no laws limiting faster-than-light movement. For example, if you wanted to establish communications across light years, a subspace signal is needed to maintain it in real-time communications with little delay. It also consists of a lot of layers, from shallow subspace to deeper subspace realms, which are more akin to alternate planes of existence with their own rules, where thoughts alone can shape them. Each can have tangible effects on real space and vice versa. Star Trek is often presented as scientifically grounded, but in reality things get pretty weird around certain areas of the lore, especially psychics and subspace. When a vessel goes to warp in Star Trek, they do not actually enter this subspace, though they do manipulate it. In order to fold space-time in the ways required to travel faster than light, you would need practically infinite levels of power, which, even to Trek levels of technology, is currently impossible. Despite the warp core, the engine of the vessel combining matter and antimatter to annihilate it and harness the resulting energy, that would still not be enough to fold space in such a way, unless you have subspace effects. The energy of the reaction is conveyed into these warp nacelles, which generate a warp field. This field is a subspace bubble that does the whole compression and expansion thing. By manipulating the subspace, which in turn bends real space because the two are linked. The higher the level of this distortion effect, the higher the factor of warp being used, and the faster you go. The ship therefore retains its presence in spacetime and appears to blur across vast distances thanks to this subspace manipulation. Now, this does mean that physical objects pose navigational hazards to the ship, which is what the deflector dish is for. Those large glowy segments, or sometimes literally dishes, at the front of the ship. These push any small debris away from the vessel, preventing catastrophic collisions. Warp drive can be messed up or messed with by outside factors, usually effects in space-time that would collapse the warp field, or effects in subspace that can cause severe turbulence. Warp in Trek is very precise, down to the meter at times, and all calculated by hyper-advanced computers. Warp 1 is the speed of light, and in most cases you'll hear that Warp 10 is the fastest achievable speed, as at this velocity you're practically performing instant travel. However, Star Trek, even after 1,000 years of pushing ever closer to this speed, has never achieved it through warp travel alone. Except that one episode of Voyager which I pretend never existed. That 1 to 10 scale, however, is also not consistent across all Star Trek series, with there being a bit of a soft reboot of that scale around the time of the original films. While far safer than the Warhammer method, the biggest issue with warp speeds are that in comparison it's slower than traversing the immaterium of Warhammer. However, a big thing in Star Trek is that alternate technologies are always being pursued and the boundaries of warp travel are always being pushed further and further. Whereas, of course, Warhammer's tech has not only stagnated, it has regressed, and most of the only development has come from rediscovering forgotten things. So, there we go. A comparison and explanation of two very different ways of interstellar travel that both use the same term. It's funny, on the surface, one is far more fantastical in its approach, but when you start digging deeper into both, they appear to be more equal in that spectrum of fantasy to sci-fi than it would appear. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the two warp drives. I've been Rick, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.